Vivek is on the phone with us now. Hi, Vivek. How are you?
Glenn, how you doing?
I'm great. I'm great. You were born in Cincinnati,
Yep.
and you're following this because you're running for governor. By the way, I hear you're doing really well, and I'm happy to hear that.
Thank you.
I see the city councilwoman. I see the police chief saying, "Well, you don't know all the facts," and I might not know all the facts. And even if there are more facts, it doesn't justify what we saw. But have you seen any other facts that the public doesn't know about on this beatdown?
Glenn, I think that the basic point is common sense. We should not have everyday hardworking Americans who are afraid to go into their cities, particularly a city like Cincinnati, for fear of being beaten up, for fear of assault, for fear of battery. And I did speak to the victim, Holly, who was assaulted. I spoke to her on Monday. At the time I had spoken to her, one of the things that surprised me is that she said not a single state or local official had even reached out to her at that point in time. And that was on Monday,
Oh, you're
after
kidding.
the Friday night of the incident, which was remarkable. And I reached out because we wanted to be helpful in any way. I mean, I saw she had some neck injuries. My wife, Apurva, is one of the top throat surgeons in the country here in Ohio. So we wanted to see how we could help. But I was surprised that, frankly, not a single public official at the city level or the state level had even reached out. And I can see why, in part because there is a culture of fear around these issues relating to violence and urban crime in particular. In Cincinnati, so I grew up there, as you said. I was born and raised in Cincinnati, lived my first 18 years of my life there, went to public schools through 8th grade, public schools where there was frequently, fights and stuff breaking out. I went to a Catholic high school for high school after that. And I will tell you, a number of the people I went to school with, grade school, high school, who still live in Cincinnati, I live in Columbus now, but they're in Cincinnati, reach out and said, thank you for saying something about this because we've noticed this issue. There is a culture of fear in our city. There's also fear of people being able to go to the city without the risk of violent crime. I think the risk for the stats right now, sadly, are 1 in 137 is your chance of being a victim of violent crime in Cincinnati. So my view is I don't care what Democrat or Republican party you're in. I don't care what your skin color is. We ought to be united around the issue of fighting violent crime in our cities. And this is in part directly the result. I'm sorry to say it, Glenn, but it's true. It is directly the result of this defund the police, the anti-cop, the anti-rule of law culture that spread across our country. And I want to be a governor who's able to speak that truth in a manner that unites people, not divides people, but doesn't hide from that truth or sweep it under the rug either, because I do think that's what's going to be required to address the problem.
As a whole society, we also have to start striving to be above animals. I watched this, and it was like watching fifth graders. Everybody standing around a fight, and everybody's like, fight, fight, fight. You're not in fifth grade anymore. I didn't see anybody, and this is what a civil society would do. I didn't really see anybody step in and go, hey, 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 guys, back up, back up. What I saw were people that were cheering it on or not involved suddenly jumping in and getting involved, which was terrifying. When the female went down, I thought they killed her. I mean, her eyes were open. She was out cold. That was a dangerous situation.
I've talked to her several times in the last week, Glenn, and it is very sad. She's a working mom. She's a single mother. And she's somebody who, on a rare occasion, went to the city to have a good time for a friend's birthday party. I think it's unconscionable that not only after she was knocked out, she wasn't even able to take an ambulance. She had to call her own Uber to get out of there. That situation of risk. And I just think that we have to think about ways we have to improve the way we're doing things.
What do you mean she couldn't take an ambulance?
Well, there wasn't an ambulance. She'd called an Uber. And so this is the kind of thing that's just sad. And I do think we ought to have an open conversation about, first of all, there's reports now that one of the assailants was let out on bond for a different crime or offense alleged earlier this month. So in the month of July, earlier that same month, was out on bond, was somebody who previously was convicted of other crimes. And so we got to rethink some of the breakages in our judicial system. We got to rethink what it means to have more of a law enforcement presence on our streets, at least in predictable hours of when there's a baseball game going on, when there's a national music concert on a Friday night in certain areas of urban parts of our cities. Does it mean that we deter crime by having just a greater law enforcement presence? And I think we got to have that conversation in the open. And I say this as somebody, Glenn, who will be the first person to not only recognize, but shout from the foothills, there are so many good men and women working very hard, men and women in blue in the Cincinnati Police Department, who I respect deeply for their service. It's not their individual fault by any stretch, and anybody who says so misses the point. But the point is, what kind of leadership do we bring to a city, to a state, to say that we do stand for not defunding the police, but funding the police, that we stand for allowing them to do their jobs with that fear of looking over their shoulder for being sued, and also to be able to have a judicial system and necessary reforms that don't just send violent criminals right back onto the street. This is common sense stuff, right? This is not left, this shouldn't be at least left versus right stuff, right? This is common sense. And that's why I'm running for governor. I do think that we have had too many politicians who have tried to sweep these issues under the rug for too long. I'm going to Cincinnati actually on Monday, Glenn. Part of my point is I want to practice what we preach. I called a friend of mine who's a former NAACP Cincinnati chapter president, a former vice mayor of the city, who actually has been quite thoughtful on a lot of these issues as well. We're going to co-host a town hall. Anybody come. If you disagree with my politics, that's fine. You could show up. But we're going to have a conversation about how we crush crime in my hometown of Cincinnati and how we crush crime in cities across our state. And I hope Ohio sets a model nationwide for putting an end to this epidemic of lawlessness and violence and do it in a way that brings us together through open dialogue. That's what I favor. And so that's the kind of leader I'm hoping to be for our state. That's why I'm in this. And, hopefully we're going to succeed.
I hope that does succeed, because Cincinnati is a great town, just a great town.
It is.
And I wouldn't go into Cincinnati now. I wouldn't. Tell me, and one of the reasons why I wouldn't is not just because of what I saw in this video, but the reaction from one of the city council members, from the police chief, your governor. What do you say to that police chief?
Look, I've had conversations with all of these folks, one-on-one, not all of them, but many of them. And look, I want to be a leader who's bringing together people across the state, whether they like me or not, right? Whether they agree with my politics or not. But what I will say is this. It is time for a new generation of leadership that speaks hard truth, that speaks with a spine. As it relates to law enforcement, we need critical out-of-the-box solutions. I mean, you think about even in the 90s, Clinton and Gingrich back then talked about the idea of equipping localities with cops to deter violence and then leaving it to the localities after that. Well, at the state level, should we be thinking about similar solutions? I think we ought to at least have a conversation about it. Thinking about bail reforms, at least in common sense ways, that we're not sending back violent criminals right back into the street to be a repeat offender when we know that's a high risk to the rest of ordinary law-abiding Americans trying to have a good time in the cities where they live. So I think these are issues where you do have a lot of leaders, including governors, including mayors, who try to sweep these issues under the rug, hope they go away. That's not a strategy. In fact, it causes frustration to fester. And when people have frustrations that they don't feel free to talk about, that's when actually bad things happen. That's what actually spurns social division. And I think true cohesion comes from being able to confront these issues head on. And so that town hall in Cincinnati, I don't know how it's going to go. I hope it goes well, but it's on Monday evening. But I think that, I did one of these in Springfield last year. Remember Springfield when it was in Ohio as well, the theme of national news. And I will tell you.
So does Ohio have a bad history of race relations?
It's not that Ohio has you brought up a great point. You think about Ohio, we're the end of the Underground Railroad. Cincinnati was the final destination. So you think about the long enough course of history, Ohio was part of the emancipation movement in the United States of America. So have there been issues over time? Sure. You go back to the early 2000s, there were racially charged riots in the city. The National Guard had to come out. This is back when I was in high school, etched into my brain. But that's true in different places across the country. I think Ohio is a great place actually to embody the best of what our country is about. You go to Cincinnati, you go to Columbus, you draw a circle around it, you got a cross section of the country. And more than California or New York, or even, I may say, Glenn, even more than Texas or Florida, the beautiful thing about Ohio is that we're a cross section of the entire United States. So if we're going to get these issues right for the country, Ohio ought to be ground zero for fixing it. And I think that's what, on the positive side, I wouldn't call it a particular history of trouble, but I think we are a part of the country that's diverse enough, that's in every sense, that you see a lot of these things bubbling up in Ohio. We got to fix them first in Ohio.
I have to tell you, you would have talked to me 30 years ago, and you would have said this guy has a particular history of alcoholism and hard to work with and yada yada. I'm not that guy. You just have to choose, and an inspiring leader. DeSantis is one here in Florida. An inspiring leader, somebody who just says, no, we're going in a different direction. People want to be safe. They want to, I don't care what color you are, what, income bracket you're in. You want to be safe. You want your family to be safe, your children to be able, you want to be able to go into town and have a nice night. You don't want to feel all of this stuff. And you don't want to have bad race relations. I mean, some do, but I think a very, very small number do. And, you can change things, if you're leading by example, but it's going to be hard because there's a lot of people that have power that don't want to fix these. I'm convinced of it. They don't want to fix these problems.
Well, that's why I'm in this, Glenn, is that I think if yesterday's politician was going to fix it, it would have happened already. But I think it's going to take a new generation that says, I'm not even making this about Republican versus Democrat politics. Is there a dimension to it we could? Sure, but forget about that. Common sense, right? Should you follow the law? Should you be able to enjoy your cities without fear of getting beaten up or assaulted? Should you be able to speak your mind freely in the open without fear of government retribution? These are the basic tenets of just what it means to be an American, to live in the best country known to the history of mankind. That's what it means to be an American. I think it's the birthright of every American to live those basic aspects of the American dream. And I want to at least revive the Ohio dream, the version of that in the heart of the country that represents the country. And you're right, people are hungry to be led. At this point, it's easy to just tell your followers the same things they want to hear, and it's easy to just preach, and lambast, the other side. I'm not doing that. What I want to do is I want to speak truth. And there are a lot of people in the inner city of Cincinnati who are every bit as worried about this epidemic of crime that might have voted Democrat in the past that still don't feel safe. And the fact of the matter is we have an opportunity to bring them into our tent and our coalition as well. That's what I'm working to do. And I think it's basic common sense, safety, a good education, the economic mobility, and the right to speak freely. These are your birthrights as Americans. And that's what we're going to fight for and revive here in the state of Ohio.
Well, I have to tell you, Vivek, thank you. And, if you've listened to me for a long time, I don't endorse people, but I also don't lie to you and tell you, something. I don't pretend to be neutral when I'm not. If I lived in Ohio, I would be voting for Vivek. I think he is dynamic and part of a very bright future. VivekForOhio.com is his address where you can go find out more about his candidacy and maybe help him out as well. Vivek, I'd love to talk to you next week after you have had this meeting to see how it went.
Yeah, I'll tell you what we learned. Take care.
Thank you very much. Vivek Ramaswamy, Ohio gubernatorial candidate.